And we are live on January 21st, 2025. Skylar Thomas, Jack Gescheit of the Tree Spirit Project. And Jack has lined up a very special guest for us today, Eric Mulvar. Um, and Jack just sent me an article this morning that was indeed a breath of fresh air. I'm a little bit astonished by it, to be honest. But without me continuing on, Jack, hello. Say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Skylar. Thank you for hosting, especially from your man in the field, the man in the beaten up, abused animal pastures. And Eric, by the way, for those who don't know that name, Eric Mulvar is the executive director of the Western Watersheds Project, one of the three plaintiffs in the recently negotiated settlement resolved lawsuit against Point Reyes Seashore, which involved money from the Nature Conservancy. And he's also a wildlife biologist. So the man knows of what he speaks. He's very well spoken. He was in the backdoor meetings, and I'm very excited to see what information either we can extract from him or what he's willing to divulge. Going to be fun.
It seems like whenever people, obviously the Point Reyes Light, Tess Elliott, and some people like that, whenever they referred to these backdoor meetings, they made it kind of sound like that was all the activists' fault and the ranchers weren't taking place in these backdoor meetings. Did you notice that? I mean, the ranchers were also keeping people in the dark.
So I'm going to, sometimes I like to warm up, but I'm going to leap into stuff I'm going to be coming back to, not just on today's show, but repeatedly for the months ahead. I'm trying to find a title for this, and I'm trying to asking the Marine Independent Journal, who, in my opinion, will actually print some of what I have to say, and does and has, the perspective on all this. People think it's about just ranching or just about Point Reyes, or about facts or about the truth. It's not. For me, the title is something like either farming propaganda or propaganda farming. Because right now, the world, our little world of Point Reyes Seashore, and all the players on all sides of this settlement are getting to see on full display how we got here in the first place, which is propaganda. You and I have talked about this a lot, Skylar, but for me, this is really front and center now. As we're going to get into in detail, ranchers got a lot from this deal, more than we environmentalists wanted, meaning they get to stay in the park, they still have their cows. There's all sorts of nonsense of more grazing, which is supposed to help the land, and it does not. It's a blight on the land. I mean, just these are scientific facts. Now, some would say, well, that's not true, Jack. We're stewards of the land. And there we are into the propaganda wars, or as Alex Jones calls it, information wars, because information is not truth. Information is information. And there are alternative facts and all that. And for me, that phenomenon, what is truth? How does the public perceive what's really going on out in the world? And at Point Reyes, how do they get their information? How is it conveyed? Right now, the ranchers are pushing back with their propaganda.
My girlfriend sent me links to social media things from the ranching community and the Trump community, and I didn't watch them. The titles alone, but she said that the comments are just off the charts. The propaganda works very well with it, if that's all that you want to believe. But just a reminder to people, because I read the administrative history of Point Reyes several times. Ranchers were leaving voluntarily before Congress even first made their attempt to create the seashore. The dairy industry was already dying. Developers, the Drake's Beach estates, were in the process of being built. Ranchers were selling out. They were going to sell out to developers or whoever. Don't pretend like they were saviors keeping that land from being developed. It's all about economics. Just like when that 20-year extended lease was proposed, and it was going to allow them to have bed and breakfasts. It was going to allow them to have shops. It was going to allow them to have pigs and chickens. And it's just about making more money. Nothing about that is historical or represents the history of the dairies there. And if they truly believed that that was an important part of Point Reyes, then they wouldn't be signing these agreements and leaving if it meant that much to them. It's all about money. Dairies can't survive without government subsidy. In fact, they're barely surviving, even with the United States dumping billions into it, only to flush that milk down the drain at the end of the year. So, this idea that the economy is going to collapse, I said this last week's show at the risk of being redundant, but this is probably worth saying twice. The ranchers said that Marin's economy was going to collapse the first time that the park service was made. Now they're saying that it's going to collapse again. The lies just continue to be the same. And the people that want to believe the lies want to. But holy shit, that Press Democrat article actually telling the truth. Holy moly. And how sad is it that I'm shocked to see the truth being printed?
Audience, look at Skylar. This is messing up his worldview. He's seeing something that he like, how did the Press Democrat? And by the way, he's referring to an article that was today. I just saw it on the list, thanks to, I think, Todd Steiner of Turtle Island Restoration Network, who's now Ken Bowie is the head. But we have our own little backroom list of environmentalists who are pissed off at all the things we had to give away here. And this article in the Press Democrat, written by 3 former Interior Department attorneys who speak truth. And they don't do it with my kind of emotional, histrionic approach. It's really measured, and it just provides facts. And I'm hoping that you said, by the way, something profound, many things you just said in your mouthful there. But, I think this bears repeating. I want to do the Bernie Sanders thing. You got to repeat it again and again about the billionaire class, and you got to repeat it about the information coming out of the ranchers' mouths right now, which has been coming out since the 60s, as you said. They're not stewards of the land. I call them sewers on the land because of the devastation. I mean, even just a little bit of beat up grass behind your head in that projected image of those dairy cow hutches out there. The land is destroyed by this business. They are heavily subsidized by the government, and the average person who's, overwhelmed with information on too many other issues doesn't know this stuff. So I see it as my job, and convince other people it's their job too, to repeat the truth again and again and again.
Hey, everyone, look at Tim Kehoe's land. That's what the ranchers did to Point Reyes National Seashore, everyone.
And by the way, again, I'll say it every freaking single show. Your documentary, The Shame of Point Reyes, that I saw 10 years ago, is a really great way to get a good dose visually. Skylar Thomas, my friend here, is a filmmaker, and he shows stuff to you that is, as you were wondering, maybe I should do in a separate email. This is an aside between you and me, Skylar. Everybody else tune out. This is not for you. But you said, maybe I should do a visual representation. Yes, 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 yes. Any words we say these days, especially with the TikTok generation, as I call the world now, need to be backed up by a visual, and preferably one that's longer than 30 or 60 seconds, so people can actually absorb new information that challenges their existing beliefs. That, hey, the green rolling hills of Marin at this time of year, when the rainy season is upon us and everything goes green, that it's emerald green like Ireland. No, it's a deforested land that's desiccated 6 to 8 months of the year by the cattle industry, which is destructive, extractive industry, a dying industry producing luxury foods at high prices that nobody needs, that are so horrifically cruel that if you saw how the sausage was being made, you'd throw up and say, I'm not having any of that, which is why they hide it. Back to you, Skylar.
So before I give too much praise out, it wasn't actually, this was 3 former Department of the Interior employees, lawyers, who wrote this and submitted it to the Press Democrat. So there, I managed to smash the only positive.
Well, my friend, you want to go dark. It's easy to do. There's lots of information. And I'm just going to read one sentence. I edited this a little bit for brevity and sorry, for clarity as well. But it says, this is from the perspective of these Interior Department lawyers who weren't involved in the Point Reyes litigation. And they say, this is almost a verbatim quote. I cut out a few words. No compensation is owed to dairy operators or ranchers, meaning in leaving the park, because they have no legal right to renew their leases, nor do they or their workers have a right to even occupy the park because they don't have approved lawful leases. And if we could take that fact and put it on a billboard inside that Huffman town hall meeting where all these ranchers are irate and you're screwing us and you're forcing us to leave, and the hardworking farmer, all of it nonsense. But it was a room full of kind of like the angry mob at a Trump rally. Sorry, true. And you just don't speak that kind of stuff with one or two voices. Only Margot had the courage to do it. And of course, got shouted down, but God bless her for trying to actually speak truth into the maw of anger and frustration and a victim mentality, which factually is not justified. Sledge goes, yep.
And you mentioned this because you were there, and I saw the photos, I saw the signs, people putting up, pretending like they care about the exploited ranch hands. And they're getting $2 million to help them transition. I wonder how many people in need across the planet have ever gotten $2 million, and that's about $2 million more assistance than the ranchers themselves would have given those people. Or I'm not finished being mean. Or you people in Marin County pretending like you care about them wouldn't have given a dime of your own dollars, and the Nature Conservancy did. So just stop ripping on the Nature Conservancy.
Yes, but where it gets complicated, Skylar, is especially in that room, there were people who were really passionate and really genuine. And in my opinion, I mean, who knows what's going on really inside somebody, but they believed what they were saying. They were actually speaking up for ranch workers who are, yeah, I know. I just want to say that too. And both our perspectives are true. They can be at the same time. They're fed the false information by the ranchers who say I mean, even now, Andrew Giacomini, the dishes, and we'll bring Eric on very shortly here to get him into this. But he's in a different position. I want to, and we'll talk about that in front of his face too. But he's someone, in the back room working on these deals, which need to be done quietly. No one does complex negotiations in front of the general public at a town hall, because you get what we saw there, which is people screaming at you, and it becomes a fact-free environment. So all deals are made in, committees in Congress. Committees exist in Congress, so group of people can sort of establish a beachhead of communication and build a framework on which you can put a deal on, and then you bring it to a larger group. It's the way bureaucracies need to work, and we need bureaucracies is something I've learned recently. Ray Cooper says, something good is happening when Skylar smiles.
Let me overlay these.
And Susan Kirk's, yes, Susan. It must be an op-ed. Yes, it is. It's an opinion piece. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, January 21st, it came out, published last night online in the Press Democrat. Go to the Press Democrat. God bless. Sorry, Skylar, watch you react to this, but thank you, Press Democrat, for putting an opinion that, is very different than a lot of your, I don't know what to say, financed pieces by, I think it's John Beck, who I actually like. I look forward to we're going to have a debate with him pretty soon in public, but that's another story. Boy, I'm worked up.
And to be clear, in case I worded that incorrectly, I'm not targeting the actual ranch hands. I'm targeting the members of the community who are privileged and pretend like they care. And, I observe the goat herders that are, the goats decimating California. And, I film them doing things that are absurd and stupid, because the marketing behind it is that, oh, these are really, highly trained people and whatever. No, they're just exploited workers. But it doesn't do any good to attack those people for the very reason that they are exploited workers. They'll just move them through the way that they move the next round of cattle that they're going to slaughter through. They don't care about these people. It just makes me sick that people pretend that the ranchers do care about these people.
Yeah, and they don't care about them. Proof is they don't give them, well, actually, let me be accurate. I don't know what they're being paid. I suspect it's not minimum wage with union benefits or vacation pay and time off and any kind of job.
No, the very article that Andrew Giacomini was in, and the guy that they interviewed, that Giacomini got to be a part of the lawsuit, said they're being paid under minimum wage in the same article, talking about how we need to help those people. You're exposing that the people that we're trying to save them from, in my opinion,
Nick Cedar says here,
have been abusing them this whole time.
Yes, exactly.
We got to bring
Yeah, so
Eric
yeah,
in
we got to bring Eric in,
pretty
and
quickly.
Nick Cedar has It's All About Money, which is why malt, the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, is such a scam, and that's a whole nother story. But I wanted to throw that in the mix. Please, let's bring in Eric Mulvar, Executive Director of Western Watersheds Project, a great group. I want to make sure at the end to give him credit and see for a donation space for them as well. Also a wildlife biologist himself. Eric, thank you so much for coming on, and it's going to be fun to watch you get worked by me and my friend here to see, and you can hold your own, but welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
What do you have to say for yourself, Eric? Did you have to listen to what we were going at here?
Well, yes. And, first of all, I think, that the NPS, or former Department of Interior attorneys, have a good point. If there's a legal right for there to be ranch leases on Point Reyes National Seashore, I'm not aware of its legal foundation. So, I think that's something that my organization has filed various lawsuits to try and enforce. And we recently reached a settlement in which we see the exit of 12 of the 14 ranchers on Point Reyes National Seashore, but the Golden Gate National Recreation Area ranchers get to stay with 20-year leases and only a 16% reduction in cattle numbers. So it was definitely a compromise, and nobody got everything they wanted.
To put it,
are those the ones in the GGRNA? Are they going to participate in all those things that I was mad about earlier? Expanding into different forms of animal agriculture and all that stuff?
There are going to be some expansions, some limited expansions in different kinds of things that are allowed at remaining ranches. On the ranches that are vacated, there is going to be allowed that the Nature Conservancy could be allowed to perform targeted grazing, which I think one of you pointed out has no ecologically proven benefits. And, I think that's indisputable.
You, Jack? You're taking claim for
both
that?
of us, buddy. You ain't the only one that calls that for the BS that it is. We're going to talk about targeted grazing in a minute. I want to have a little aside on that. I want to run that one into the ground where it deserves to be run into. Targeted grazing, my eye. Sorry, Eric. Go ahead. Welcome to our show.
So, Eric, well, thanks. And I in this field, there's a lot of good news. The Tule elk get the freedom to roam throughout Point Reyes National Seashore. That they won't be harassed under the new general management plan. There won't be any more manure spreading on the hilltops with the concentrated manures. There won't be any growing of silage, and therefore, there won't be any harvesters out there combine harvesting during ground nesting bird season and running over wildlife. So that's ended, and the dairies all have taken out and have left, so or will be leaving. So that practice will end on Point Reyes National Seashore.
So wait a second. You're saying,
and then
I'm sorry. You saying I do what I do here, which is underlining the things you say that you assume the audience knows because you're immersed in this stuff and living it. But you're saying that they are spraying liquid manure onto the land at Point Reyes Seashore for decades. That's what's been going on, Eric?
That's what's been going on in big old trucks with giant tanks of liquefied manure. That was getting spread on the hilltops on your Point Reyes National Seashore. And that was part of the package.
After the dry manure.
Park Service authorized activities.
Try to keep us quiet. Go, Skyler. Throw in your.
Well, I've got a delay. I'm moving to a different part of the place, so you guys keep talking.
Sorry, Eric. This is unlike the negotiations. This is some sort of jock radio. I don't know, rancher radio.
Well, and what I can say about about this process is that the mediation and all the discussions that happen during mediation are completely confidential, and they have to remain confidential. So I can't speak about those things. The settlement and the general management plan have been published by the National Park Service, so those are a matter of public record. I can talk about things that that never were part of the discussions or never were things that we ever agreed to. So I can talk about that. And I can say that we certainly don't agree with everything that's in that new general management plan. It's also notable that as part of the settlement, if all of the ranchers do leave, and all of them have to leave, then we are required to dismiss our lawsuit at that point and vacate our claims with prejudice, which means that we can't bring those same claims against that same decision, which is the 2020 general management plan that we sued against ever again. That does not mean that we cannot bring litigation against future actions if they're not legal. And it also means that we remain able to file litigation over the enforcement of the settlement or the general management plan if there's not compliance with those. So, and then of course, there's nothing that this settlement does or the new general management does that changes the laws that Congress passed originally. So if something was illegal before we filed this lawsuit, it's still illegal today because a general management plan cannot amend an act of Congress, nor can a settlement amend an act of Congress. So the underlying laws are still in place. And they're, if folks believe that there's something illegal, then, it is the Park Service's responsibility to follow.
It's such an interesting thing to discuss because there's perspective right now. You were kind of speaking to environmentalists. So I know like Susan Kirks is wondering about targeted grazing by what animals. And there's so many questions to answer to environmentalists who wanted, like me, no compromise, no animals, end it now. And, you guys could have hung in there and tried to get that, but it would inevitably have delayed it by a lot of time into the new administration, which is far less favorable. And I actually really agree with what you guys did. I think you did an amazing job, and you got the glass, depending on which way you want to look at it, half full, or you emptied out half the glass of BS. So that's an incredible accomplishment that nothing else had done, or basically there's this groundswell of pressure from activists, the other lawsuit, all these editorializing and stuff. And then it helped you guys, as you said, your lawsuit was essential, but all lawsuits, and yours especially, was fueled by the foment of all this activist work as well. We all work in concert for a common cause, but yours was in this case, the tip of the spear that finally cut through and punctured their propaganda so that all dairies are out of Point Reyes. All 3 elk herds will now be reunited. They can still, they won't be hazed in their lands, which were pastoral zone. It's now considered scenic landscape zone, a new name, but it does mean that actually the elk take priority now. And it's only if some elk, which they won't, start, banging their antlers into the front door of a barn and attacking it and we refuse to leave, can the ranchers run to the Park Service as they used to for any little thing and say, hey, get this problem elk out of here. Get this wild animal in this national park off of my commercial dairy where I poop on the land for profit. Sorry, that was a bit of a run-on, but I wanted to get a bunch of points in there. Hi, Schuyler. Welcome home.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, listening to all of that, I want to tell people why I was so concerned about them expanding animal agriculture. I love domestic animals. I think that they're wonderful. I think that I love them more than ranchers do, probably. It's not that I think that pigs are despicable or sheep are despicable or cows are despicable, but it's a direct conflict with nature. Look at how many conflicts there are in Point Reyes just talking about elk, who are an iconic species. All the complaining about the ranchers is that, elk are going to eat too much grass. We have to have this fence where elk die horrible deaths because it's a conflict with the ranching. Why are the silage fields grown? For more feed for the cattle, which is why that habitat that the animals are tricked into using as habitat, they get chopped up in the mower blades every year. Now, imagine if a big animal like an elk is considered a problem and you're going to bring in, or the biggest animal, or the animal being threatened is a 1,500-pound dairy cow, and you're going to bring in chickens, you're going to bring in pigs, you're going to bring in things that other animals in Point Reyes could actually target. Now you're going to make an enemy out of just about everything out there that might say, wait a minute, what is this new animal here? What is this potential food source? What about all the feed that they would have brought in for that animal agriculture? What about the additional feces that would be out there because of that animal agriculture? All of this is in conflict with nature. Like, imagine the raptors out there. Imagine the hawks and the owls that might say, I would like to have a chicken. Now we're going to wage war on raptors. Now we got to wage war on burrowing animals because sheep that weren't supposed to be in that field are tripped and broke their leg. Coyotes can start targeting those things. Sadly, the coyote is about as close to a predator as we have out there now, except for the mysterious occasional report of a mountain lion, but that's what we're reduced to. And anyway, I didn't close that very succinctly, but you all got it.
Well, these are giant topics, and someone's, thank you for this discussion. This discussion about, well, it's really agriculture, but specifically animal agriculture, its impact on the land, how it is completely separated from nature. Do you guys know the book *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari?
I haven't read it.
It's a 425-page book. I've been hearing a lot about it because he just came out with another book about artificial intelligence, but called *Sapiens*. And it's a detailed historian's explanation of the impact of agriculture on humanity, starting about 10,000 years ago. But it's to, because we're on a few minutes show here, it's what you're talking about, Skylar. For humans to stay in one place instead of being nomadic, I'm going to make a farm. I'm going to put up fences. I'm going to have my domesticated animals that behave differently, despite, as you were saying earlier, Skyward, that they've got hooves, just like elk. They behave differently. And I will shut up in a minute here and let Eric, the wildlife biologist, weigh in on all this. But I want to keep bringing up these themes to teach the public that domesticated animals have a completely different impact on the land. And it's difficult to fight because there's propaganda by the people who make money doing that, including, harvesting or taming bison in this country to make bison burgers and turning them into, shadows of them or the former selves. They don't roam large areas of land and die on the land. It's an extractive industry. And again, the picture behind Skylar's head just shows the story. That used to be coastal scrub out at Point Reyes, and it's a destroyed landscape because we want to put animals on it who behave differently, 1,200-pound, 1,500-pound animals, bring in food and water for them, shoot any wildlife, harass any wildlife that would dare compete with them for those resources, and then kill them young, take them off the land. It's like industry pushed onto a healthy landscape.
But you forgot the positive side of that. You also steal babies from mothers. You forgot.
I think you were being cynical. I don't know if that helps the conversation, Skyward, but I love you for it.
And it all comes back to the agriculture industry's fundamental assumption that humans ought to have dominion over the birds of the air and the beasts of the field and tame the wilderness and make a domestic landscape out of it. And that is a fundamental American philosophical drink of Kool-Aid that we've been serving ourselves for the last 300, 400 years here on this continent. And essentially, this couldn't be more wrong. There were, for tens of thousands of years, indigenous people on this continent who didn't think that nature was there to be conquered and subdued and dominated and repressed, that nature was something there to be coexisted with. And they were the civilized ones. And then these uncivilized barbarians showed up from overseas and started, first spread their diseases, but then started their program of ethnic cleansing to get rid of the indigenous population, the native Californians in this state. And were very effective in either eliminating them or relegating them to small reservations and moving them out of the way so that the European way of looking at nature could dominate, and that we could have landscapes where nature was erased and replaced with whatever was most profitable for the agriculture industry. And that's, we saw some of that on Point Reyes National Seashore too. If you look at what used to be called the pastoral zone, those areas that the dairy ranches and the beef ranches were using, those lands are dominated by European invasive annual grasses. These are weeds, and they've got big infestation of European thistles like milk thistle, like Italian thistle. And they've got the silage crops that they grew to feed the dairy cattle that escaped and went everywhere. They're even out there on Tamales Point, where there was never any silage grown, as far as I'm aware. And all of this ecological change was in the service of converting a natural ecosystem into something that supported the maximization of agricultural profit. And that's what it was all about. And that's what we have now is the legacy of, perhaps, over 150 years of that. Not a very long period of time in California's history, but certainly long enough to replace the native coastal grasslands and those long-lived perennial bunch grasses and native shrubs with fields of uniform European annual weeds.
Welcome to our Rant-a-Fest. Well done,
Yeah.
Eric.
Yes, Eric, you and I see eye to eye. I don't know if you've watched any of my work, but I talk about that all the time. It's just amazing that a working system in a biodiversity hotspot that supported a myriad of species in large numbers, Europeans show up and say, "Oh, we need to make use out of this," as if it wasn't in use and there was no value to it. But I also want to tie in quotes from the original ranchers when they protested the creation of the seashore, saying, "Must we give this up so that only a few, for the benefit of only a few?" And the reality is, everything was destroyed for the profit of a few. The creation of the seashore allows the many to enjoy nature. It provides for many. The ranchers provide for themselves and the handful of people that can afford their products at the expense of the planet and the taxpayer.
So let me just jump in here. The other issue that's rarely discussed in this conversation, it's just too big for most Americans to get their head around, is class. Class. Wealthy landowners, a handful. By the way, do you hear a compressor in the background, or am I okay here? Someone just turned on a compressor. Okay, great. So a few wealthy landowners own all that land out there. They then have their slave class of ranch worker, undocumented, my grandparents, great-grandparents, undocumented workers in this country. So I got nothing but compassion for them, but they're exploited as well, paid a low wage. And if they say anything wrong against the massa, then they're going to be, kicked off the land, lose their jobs, and maybe deported as well, especially these days, right, with the new administration. So that is the system that's in place. With the Orwell wrote about a high, the middle, and the low. So the high have a bunch of the land, a little bit more people at the middle, which is many people in environmentalist organizations want to, like the system in place, get it to the high and won't address the root problem of the system. And then, of course, in that town hall with Huffman, there were a lot of angry people at the bottom, which is to say not just ranch workers, but they're kind-hearted representatives who are trying to get them housing for the ranch workers. And unfortunately, then the lower classes start battling each other to get the crumbs, or perhaps to tear down the system. But there was talk about why can't we have housing in a national park? And it's like, oh God. I mean, from a objective, distant view, sure, there's land out there. Let's house people. And now you're putting poor people at each other's throats, fighting for the crumbs allowed us by the ownership class.
Eric, earlier you said that you couldn't talk about what the behind the closed doors negotiations. Does that mean that some of these ranchers who are coming out and claiming that they were forced out and that they didn't have a choice are in fact lying and violating part of that agreement because they are talking? And is it even true? Like, these people agreed to something and are getting paid. Are they truly being forced out, or is this an agreement?
Was there a no whining clause?
Well, the settlement is public, and there is no clause that prevents whining and complaining. And so that,
these are Trump's people.
Covered by the settlement, whether for good or ill. Now, were there ranchers that were breaching confidentiality? I saw things showing up in news stories that certainly it seems hard to believe didn't come from inside the mediation circle. And the one place they didn't come from was the environmental plaintiffs.
Thank you.
We did not have any leaks. And the reason is that we're professionals and we're not going to breach that confidentiality, because we think that confidentiality is why mediation can occur. And in fact, if you're going through mediation and you're going through it in bad faith, and you're going to sneak around and then, kind of tell part of the story that you think supports your narrative outside the mediation, then nobody is going to want to enter into mediation with you. And therefore, you shoot yourself in the foot if you're doing that. You also lose credibility in the public if you promise that you are going to maintain confidentiality and then you're out there passing rumors around. So it's just not good practice.
I'm not going to make this ad hominem, but to your point, I watched two different ranchers, one who took the deal took millions and will leave, and one who decided to stay because he chose to stay, or as we say, he volunteered to stay. He didn't have to stay. And both of them were a bitching and a moaning. Like, oh my God. So on both sides, you're going to be moaning. And, I guess I really pride myself in being objective about this. Someone could watch our discussion saying these environmentalists kicked out all the dairies and they're still bitching and moaning, to be fair. And that would be a correct criticism. I don't want targeted grazing. I want to get into that. But of course, in my deep respect and admiration for Leah Wilborn, the number one cause of all this destruction is animal farming. Just tell people, meaning listeners and listeners' friends, they must stop eating animal products if they really care about animals, if they care about the environment, and if they care about the pandemic risk. Meaning, folks, if you get worked up about this stuff and want to blame the ranchers, well, enjoy, go to it. There's some blame there for sure, but we all contribute to it by eating their products. We can't have a celebratory meeting and have Cowgirl Creamery cheese and Strauss ice cream served at our party, because that goes directly into the pockets of the people who perpetuate these industries, thanks to us consumers participating in it. Hello, good morning.
I just let you do your vegan bit and move on.
Well,
and yes, I am vegan, but you know that I think people will close their ears the same way that they do. If you buy into the idea that God gave us this planet to destroy this planet,
dominion.
Yeah, if you actually believe that type of shit, then you're also going to believe that he gave us animals to torture and become fat eating. So.
But you don't even have to be a vegan to see that we don't need these sorts of activities on National Park Service lands.
Yes, amen.
On public lands managed by the BLM or the Forest Service. They do not add to these lands. They only add to the pocketbooks of those private,
And it's amazing that people act like this is rare. Like, oh my God, fly from the other side of the world to come see a dairy ranch because they only exist in Point Reyes National Seashore. Save them at all risk. I mean, come on. I feel like all of California is either a strip mall or agriculture now, except for Point Reyes National Seashore.
This is back to my point about repeating information again and again and again. The propaganda wars that have been ongoing since, well, they're always ongoing, but since the 1960s when the park was created. Since that time, when ranchers were, these same families, many of them were paid millions to leave and didn't, reneged on the deal. They've been saying, well, we helped create this wonderful park, when people like Ken Brower, who were around and watching it all, him as a teenager at the time, know that's absolute nonsense. The ranchers fought this tooth and nail. They did not want to sell their land. They did not want to leave the park to create it in the first place. And that was, again, the compromise deal that gave them 25 years in most places leases to stay and gradually phase out and move off the land. If they want to continue their destructive business, do it elsewhere, not in a national park. And here we are again, revisiting that same thing, again, taking millions of dollars, agreeing to leave, and then going to the public and saying, they're destroying dairy industry. Oh no, how can you do that to us? Complete and utter BS.
And I'll just address Leah really quick because she's a supporter and she's on here a lot. It's not... I obviously, of all people, if you've seen my channel, don't have a problem talking about the problems of animal agriculture and the being plant-based. It's just, I know how quickly people close their ears, and if I can get them a nugget of actual information about Point Reyes before they close their ears, then they can hear the next step and the next step. And that's why I created a separate channel just to talk about ecological things. But of course, I always get torn about which channel to put these on because they're tied together. Destroying the planet to eat something you don't need to be eating is both philosophically wrong and ecologically wrong. It's both at the same time.
So how about
this? You get rid of the torture and you get rid of the inefficient, unsustainable businesses that is blatant of a lie as you can get, calling these dairy industries sustainable. I mean, they're the exact opposite. Just don't participate in those things. You let nature come back. You actually start coexisting. It just all goes hand in hand. And by the way, there is no true joy in domination. There is no true joy in turning God's creation into whatever it is you think that God's plan for manifest destiny or dominion over the planet was. The real joy is going out there and sitting with those animals and observing them and letting that touch your soul.
That is a huge other topic here. Welcome to our rambling show, Eric, meaning, when you say that, I think, well, no, Native Americans, honored and loved the animals and would hunt and kill and eat them, to which I would say simply, because that's a whole nother, a Pandora's box of conversation to open up. It was thousands of years ago, far fewer humans, pre-industrial revolution, completely different way. And Native Americans, used the land and killed animals, but they didn't do what we now do post-industrial revolution, which is wipe out entire species and affect the climate. They didn't have that power. They were human, in my opinion, they were human beings too, and did good and quote unquote good and bad things. It depends on what your perspective is, how much we have a place here versus where I am now, which is humans are such the dominant killer, apex predator, destructive species. My bias is like, let's leave some animals. I'm not so worried about the humans anymore. We're cockroaches. We're not. And by the way, cockroaches are amazing, intelligent creatures that don't foul their own ecosystem. Far more intelligent as a community than human beings. But I think we've strayed, or I have strayed just a little bit from Point Reyes seashore and the deal that was just cut. Let's talk about targeted grazing, what that is, because that was kind of in the chat here. People are wondering what that means and what animals it entails and how will that be used. Eric, do you want to touch on that as an overview?
Well, what we know is what we know from the general management plan. And targeted grazing is one of those terms that doesn't have a very rigorous definition. So it means all things to all people, and you can interpret it pretty much any way you want. Now, what the general management plan says is that targeted grazing can be used to achieve one of, I think it was 6 objectives. Some of those objectives were ecological, like bringing back native coastal grasslands or suppressing weeds. Some of those objectives, one of those objectives explicitly was not ecological, which was reducing the amount of fuel on the landscape, which is a purely mechanical kind of exercise. And, we have at Western Watersheds Project looked at that and to determine whether, gee, is that legitimate? Can we really, use cows or other grazers to knock back the amount of vegetation and reduce fire risk? And there's not a whole lot of science that backs that up, quite frankly. There is one study from the USDA's Animal Research Station, I think it is in Oregon, that shows that if you graze off 80% of the biomass in a given year, that you can reduce flame length. Okay. But if you graze off 80% of the annual biomass, you're destroying your native bunch grasses and you're bringing back annual weeds. And the annual weeds might be alive for only a portion of the year and then might die and become completely dry and very flammable. And that's what we've seen in the interior West with the weed cheatgrass. So you're actually making the landscape more flammable by wiping out the native species that would have been alive during the late summer and had some level of fuel moisture, and replacing them with annual grasses that die and become basically jackstraw. And that is tinder for a fire. And that's what we've seen in the interior West as well. So I wouldn't necessarily think that that you wouldn't have about the same problem on Point Reyes National Seashore with the annual grasses that are the non-native weeds out here.
I got a question, a specific targeted. I have a targeted question. How is it? Tell me how the proponents of it say by bringing in cattle that'll get rid of invasives. How does that? They only eat the bad plants. You tell the cow, no, don't eat the good coastal grass. Just eat the thistle. I mean, how does that work? How does it even work?
Well, there's very little scientific research in California coastal grasslands to inform our understanding of this issue. But there's lots of research in the interior West. And in the interior West, what happens? If you put cattle out on cheatgrass, a heavily cheatgrass invaded area, then if you happen to put them out during that 6 weeks when the cheatgrass is green, they will eat the cheatgrass, but they will preferentially eat the native bunch grasses first because they're more nutritious. And so even though they might eat some of the cheatgrass, they are continuing to wipe out the native bunch grasses that are, what you really want to restore if you want to get less fire prone. And while you might reduce the amount of seed heads that are out there for cheatgrass, the cheatgrass is a prolific seeder. And I suspect that probably the European annual grasses are probably prolific seeders also, because the whole strategy of being an annual grass is that you throw out a bunch of seeds and you survive the drought period in seed form. That's your whole ecological strategy if you're an annual grass. So, essentially these seed banks in these areas that are being targeted grazed for cheatgrass are so packed with cheatgrass seeds that the cheatgrass is what you get after targeted grazing, generally speaking. And so it's an exercise in futility. You can't heal the land with the same implement that destroyed it.
Wait
You
a
can't
second.
do it.
Wait a second.
It's just
You
it's
just said,
ecological.
and I want to repeat because I've got the mind of a third grader. You said you can't heal the land with the same mentality and the same modality as what destroyed it in the first place. Right? So
And yet here we are.
That's going to need, that's my self-appointed task. Repeat it, because people need to hear things a bunch of times, especially if it's like, no, we're going to graze. We're going to put cows in there to keep fire danger down because I know fire is bad. Look what's happening in LA. As if what's happening in LA has anything to do with what's happening at Point Reyes Seashore, which is supposed to be, returned to a natural state where fire is necessary and normal and welcome. Although, of course, it's a much more complex conversation because what's there isn't what was there originally. And my question, it makes me realize, Skylar, we should have Eric on with Laura Cunningham and specifically just focus on what would they like to see out there and have that as a little time capsule recording to share with everybody who asked this question. It's going to come up again and again and again. What would we like to see happen? We're going to be the continuing battle for what happens to that landscape. It never ends. The fight continues.
Eric,
And so for targeted grazing that's going to happen on Point Reyes National Seashore. Now, the maximum that it could ever have on the wettest possible year will be 70% less cows than's out there now. So that's a major reduction in cattle numbers. So that will be better than what was there before. On an average year, it's about 16% of the cattle that were out there now. These are numbers that we see as maximum limits, not targets. And we also see them as, quite frankly, ecologically unsustainable. And the fact is that the Park Service put these numbers in this general management plan. They didn't ask our permission, and they didn't get our buy-off on that. And so, but the agency also has the discretion to manage its targeted grazing program in such a way that they could have a lot less cattle than that too. And within their discretion, within their agency choices, if they can choose either to bring back the native coastal grasslands and try and manage their grazing to be compatible with that, or we think there's room for them to retard the recovery of the native coastal grasslands. And it's going to take a lot of scrutiny by the public and by, conservation organizations to hold the agency's feet to the fire to make sure that in that scenic landscape zone, we are getting native coastal grasslands.
I got to jump in. Is it
possible?
Yes. No. Skylar, let me do one real quick, and then it's all yours, I promise. So I want to underline what Eric said, but Derek just did it for me by asking the question, do the grazing animals actually make the problem worse than it would be on ungrazed yet seeded land by fertilizing and dispersing the seeds via their manure? ? Go, Skylar. That's my question too. Same thing.
So, Eric, I hope Laura's supposed to have been communicating through to you on my behalf over these years, but I sure would love to work directly with Western Watersheds because I've been documenting in painful detail the failed fire mitigation grazing programs in California. And for Point Reyes National Seashore to just insert in without it even being a negotiation to do the wrong thing ecologically, I say this every week on the show, we got to get that staff out of there. They're extensions of the ranchers. The livestock will prevent the return of the natives and will exacerbate the cheatgrass problem. And that is everywhere that I've observed. Now, someone might come and do a cheat study and look right after the livestock shortened some vegetation and right when California's natives are trying to come. And even if you cheated and studied at that time, it doesn't last because the cheatgrass grows so fast that it drowns out that original attempt by California's native annuals to try and come back. Everywhere I'm filming here in Pinole Ridge down in the bay. I don't know if that's close enough to be coastal, once historically been coastal prairie, but there's not much coyote brush left, and there's not much poison oak left. There's not much left for the native wildlife, but people are happy to sacrifice. Let's say that there were a dozen coyote brush plants left on the hillside. It's fine as far as the people here are concerned that those get annihilated first. Just like you said, the very first thing to go are the natives, just turned into firewood, ironically enough, something that looks like it's ready to burn. And they never solve the cheatgrass problem. Never. They're here 6 months out of the year, and you touched on it. I call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. You need the goats because of the weeds. The weeds are there because of the goats. And California's history shows us that the introduction of this livestock is why we lost the natives in the first place, and it was converted to this cheatgrass. And yet here we are saying, oh, the solution to this problem is the problem. It blows my mind that this can still be happening right now, and that we have people in charge still, not just your average citizen saying dumb stuff, but the actual Point Reyes National Park Service saying, oh yeah, we need to keep bringing in livestock.
So this is what this.
And, I mean, to directly address the question, can livestock spread weed seeds? Yes, absolutely. And if those livestock have not been eating on certified weed seed free fodder, or they have been grazing in pastures that have weed seeds, they're going to be picking up weed seeds, and they're going to be in their digestive tract, and some of them can come through and be deposited. Not very many, but some. And for cattle and sheep and goats, if they have curly hair, and most do, then the seeds can get trapped in their fur and get carried around and deposited. And indeed, some of these annual grasses have distribution by their herbivores as a major reproductive strategy. This is how they have evolved to distribute themselves across the landscape. And this is how these annual weeds got here in the first place, whether you're talking Italian ryegrass on Point Reyes National Seashore or cheatgrass in the drier interior regions. It's the cattle, it's the sheep. That's what is your kind of Johnny Appleseed of these weeds.
Was there a negotiation that tried to focus on using native animals to be the prescribed grazers instead of using non-native animals?
I have the same question. Why not elk and deer to do the keeping of the so-called bullshit fire danger reduced?
Well, I can't tell you about the discussions, of course, but I can tell you that from Western Watershed's perspective, the Thule elk are the right grazer for the job. And indeed, on the scenic landscape zone, at least, those grazers do get priority and in terms of their grazing. So they're not going to be suppressed in order to make room for cattle at the very least. Now, is it a perfect solution? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it is. It was a compromise. And what we had to look at was, in the grand scheme of things, if 12 of the 14 ranch operations take a buyout and depart from Point Reyes National Seashore, and the elk get loose and get to be able to repopulate the area, is that a better outcome than we could get under litigation? And under litigation, we were pretty confident that we were going to win our lawsuit. Okay, we felt pretty good about our claims. On the other hand, you never do know what kind of remedy a judge is going to hand down at the end of the lawsuit. Many times a judge will hand down a remedy that says, yes, National Park Service, or yes, Bureau of Land Management or Forest Service, what you did was illegal. Now go back and do another planning process. And that doesn't actually change anything on the ground. So, or in other cases, if it's a substantive claim, the judge might end it for all time, that particular use that was causing the problem and was found to be illegal. Now, it's kind of, it's kind of like gambling, trying to figure out if you can know what the judge is going to, or guess what the judge is going to do. And, in all my 24 years as an environmental professional, from, always working for organizations that lean very heavily on litigation, because that's the only way to get federal agencies to obey the law. The judges will surprise you. And sometimes they surprise you in a positive direction and sometimes in a negative direction. And, these are part of the unknown. So, it's a question of, okay, here is the brokered agreement, which is a compromise, but it's a known quantity. You're going to get it. Or do you gamble on getting something better, but risk getting something
How
less
close would you
satisfying?
say that you
And
were to, if you were to go the litigation route, would that have come to completion?
In what time frame you mean?
it's that's the path not taken, and so we're never going to know what would have happened.
And
had we
even if
gone
you
that
had
route.
one, then is it another scenario where the Park Service can say, okay, we're going to go draw up a new plan, and the ranchers just continue business as usual until the next plan is introduced? So, God knows how many more years of damage.
Well, the first time we sued in 2016, and we were suing over what we considered the illegality of those ranch leases. What we got as a settlement was a new general management
That was
plan.
terrible.
The new general management plan came out in 2020
Yeah.
or 2021, and it was worse
Right.
than what we had
Right.
before. So it didn't improve
That's
anything.
Well, there's no reason to
all.
believe that
It made
there's no
things
reason to
slightly
believe
worse.
it would have gone better this time. Could have easily been the exact same crap.
It could have been, or we could have had a judge that ruled that livestock grazing is illegal on Point Reyes National Seashore and wrote an injunction that said there shall never be another cow grazing there ever again. And we'll never know, right? And somewhere between those two poles would be what the outcome is. But closer to which one, it's
I'm
really
struggling.
hard
I
to
want to use an expression that I get understandably criticized by the vegans, which is, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, assuming I want to go kill birds in the bush. But you knew you could get away, you could come away with something tangible here. And in my opinion, rather quickly realized within 15 months versus the other route. I mean, it could have been a total disaster or something better, but it would take years down the road. And of course, the wild card of a different head of the Interior Department, not rancher friendly, to put it mildly. I mean, very rancher friendly, excuse me.
And the one thing that is self-evident that I can disclose about the mediation process is that we did sign the settlement. So we accepted the bargain, as it were, Faustian or otherwise. And, so we thought in our judgment that having those 12 ranches empty of cattle, having those Thule elk come back in the seashore, having those various kinds of activities like manure spreading and silage growing and such things cease on the seashore was a reasonable enough trade for having ranching continue in Golden Gate National Recreation Area, though at a slight decrease, 16% fewer cattle, and having two ranching operations continue on Point Reyes National Seashore. That and of course, the ranchers were bought out by the Nature Conservancy. It wasn't that they were kicked out. They took a voluntary buyout. The Nature Conservancy offered them some sum of money, which I, to this day, still don't know what that sum of money is. And I'm completely happy that I don't. I don't want to know how much money that is, because these are ranchers that already were paid full fair market value for their ranches and then continued to stay on when those ranches were owned by the National Park Service. And so do I think that they were owed one thin dime in addition? No, but on the other hand, if one private entity wants to take private dollars and give it to another private entity, then that's their decision. And as an organization that is an advocate for the public interest, such private transactions really don't enter the public interest.
Eric, I think not only are they not owed, I think that they should spend the rest of their lives paying reparations, and their future generations should be paying reparations. It's incalculable how much damage they've done to Point Reyes National Seashore.
Well, they've been doing the way
That's a valid
they've been
point.
doing that damage to the land ever since they moved into it 150-ish years ago.
But it's historic, Jack.
and,
That makes it okay. It's historic.
and it's historic damage.
It's historic damage.
And by the way, Paula, I was saying Paulele chat. It's Paula. Oh, I love you. A donut in the hand is worth 2 in the box.
Well, I even said at the end of the Shame of Point Reyes, I was like, pay him again. I don't care. Just get him out. It's unfair, but just get him out. And my little speech that I said earlier, what I really wanted the listeners to take away is that while litigation is going on, while negotiations are going on, the ranchers are still out there damaging and profiting. So I can understand why you would go this route.
Wow.
Now, Jack, I can understand it. Now, Jack, you asked this last week. I don't even know if Eric, you're allowed to answer this, but can any of these guys back out that signed and be like, I don't want to do it anymore?
Well, technically, they have 15 months to complete the wind down and exit of Point Reyes National.
I'm sorry, did you say wind down
Now.
or wine down?
Well, wind with a D is the way that the settlement agreement is crafted. But they have 15 months to accomplish this. If all of them do indeed depart, then we are obligated to dismiss our lawsuit. If some subset of them don't leave, then we're not obligated to dismiss our lawsuit. And then we're left with our full array of choices with a new reality and a new general management plan. And the new general management plan, by the way, does zone all of those departing ranches as scenic landscape zone where commercial livestock grazing is prohibited. So if they stay, then they are in violation of the general management
As they were originally. So
and what happened?
Well, but more so.
Well, but the general management plan before the general management plan said we will give you 20-year leases. That's what the general management plan said in 2021. The new general management plan that was inked this year says that those lands where the departing ranchers have signed agreements upon the departure of upon those, kind of 15-month wind down periods completing, those become scenic landscape zone. And you can't have commercial cattle there anymore. So maybe the ranchers could stay, but their cattle couldn't.
Think about that, Howard. So the momentum has shifted. And of course, that's public pressure. And someone writes here, Sledge, we the people are the ones, together can change it. Idealistic, naive, if you wish, and I totally believe in it. It's a lot of people, a lot of environmentalists, these 3 groups along with Western Watersheds Project, other animal rights and environmental groups have been pushing on this. We need to keep writing, as our group does, to the papers and dominating the narrative, which is to say revealing the truth. That's essential in this. And Eric reminds me of that, even as someone who's in the negotiations, saying, their groups are doing this, but it was every one of them was saying, thank you to this group of environmentalists who are banging away on us all the time. And for the environmentalists to educate the people.
Well, and it wasn't just WWP, RRI, and the Center for Biological Diversity that got this settlement across the finish line. Advocates for the West spent, I don't know how many untold hours doing these negotiations, even more than I did. And so, they deserve a lot of credit for getting the deal across the finish line. But the fact that this deal was even achievable comes as a result of the fact that grassroots people all over the country who care about Point Reyes National Seashore, when the general management plan back in 2020 was being promulgated, they all spoke out and said, we don't want livestock grazing anymore on Point Reyes National Seashore. And those comments totted up to 94% of all the comments received by the National Park Service. And that changed the public narrative, because now, instead of all the locals really like their Cowgirl Creamery or Strauss Dairy products, and want the ranchers to stay, the narrative now becomes the vast majority of the public wants the ranchers to go. And that made that made that put a lot of pressure on the agriculture industry. It put a lot of pressure on the Park Service, and it took away the myth that the livestock industry itself had been propagating, that everybody loves cattle and cattle are the be all and end all, and they belong on Point Reyes National Seashore. That narrative went away, and that's the narrative. That narrative sinking is what left some room for some negotiations to come into play, where now you can have organizations that come with money and are offering buyouts, and ranchers.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate the clarity and conviction of your voice, and I hear the fiery activist in you, not just the guy who needed politically in the situation we're with this negotiation to make compromises and to give away some of what you didn't want to give away. I hear your conviction in that voice, so thank you. And I also want to spread a little credit around that study. I forget how many tens of thousands of people kicked into the Park Service, but I remember Ken Boulay was one of the kind of chief statistics divulger, and it was 91.7% of comments wanted cows out of the park, and they go there to see the wildlife and to see the elk. And I also want to give a shout out to In Defense of Animals, an animal protection organization that was backing my activism, getting media attention, for my Tree Spirit project. And there are more players. A lot of people were active in this. So, yeah.
And the departure of the ranches and the freeing of the Thule elk as a result of everyone who spoke out, everyone who showed up. It's not this is a victory that doesn't belong just to one organization or three or four. It belongs to every single organization and individual that stood up for this landscape and the native wildlife and
this is clearly this is clearly a step in the right direction. But does the timing not weird you out at all, especially with democracy crumbling and tyranny coming in?
It'll be interesting to see what happens under the new Trump administration. Certainly, we do know that one of the ranchers was featured in a Trump press conference during his first term. And so they may have connections. On the other hand, that same rancher took a buyout and is leaving. And so,
and he whined about it.
And yet he was happy to take the money, apparently. But I think we're going to have to see. It's going to be difficult for the new administration to unwind it, even if they want to. I mean, this is, it's not like this is a deep red state, and strong Trump allies in the governor's office want the result overturned. Therefore, they can expect political favors to be handed down from the new administration. It's abundantly unclear what would happen if the Trump administration would unwind things. But, it might just reset us back to the courtroom.
Deanna Lynn comments, I'm not sure who that is, but thank you for watching, Deanna. Your name is new to me. We see a lot of ranchers becoming threatening toward those who seek to protect and preserve the land, water, and animals. Bundy case, obviously.
That Bundy case.
So this is why when I was at the town hall for Huffman and we saw the angry locals basically spewing falsehoods, nice way to say it, those need to be challenged. Democracy dies in darkness. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Choose your homily or nostrum. But that's not nostrum. They're truisms. We need to keep in the game, keep fighting, keep spreading the truth about what's going on there, and not let those false ideas gather momentum.
Ooh, Eric has.
If it's only the ranchers who are complaining and saying this was a terrible thing that happened to us, and there are no environmentalists or animal activists or vegan activists that stand up and say, hey, wait a minute here. This should have gone a different way, we think too, or, we think this is a good compromise, then, the public narrative is going to be reset back to that original narrative, which is, oh, the ranchers, everybody cares about them and nobody, everybody else thinks that that they should stay. So, I think all sides of the debate should be representing themselves in the public square at this point. If there are folks who like the fact that, the compromise agreement gets a half a loaf, then they should speak out in that way. If there are folks that think there should be more, they should feel free to say that as well. I think, free speech is what we should be fighting for in this country. And if you self-censor and you muzzle yourself, then you are just serving the interests of those who would like to muzzle you of their accord.
I
You're
just
here.
tap on Lunny really quick. Maybe the taxpayers can pay to have him flown in to pose with Trump, and they can have a whine off. I mean, those two just on stage whining together would be something. Derek asked a great question, because everywhere across California that I see that land has been bought from historic ranching or from past ranching, the barbed wire gets left behind. Like, people don't clean up. This public land is just covered in non-functioning barbed wire fences, and Point Reyes National Seashore is covered in it too. I mean, it's a disgrace of a national seashore, just covered in it. Not even the currently used fencing, the old fencing and coils of fencing just left out there to entangle wildlife and pollute the land. But it made me think about something else. How much funding is going to be freed up because Point Reyes National Park Service isn't going to be out there setting up fencing for the ranchers, or having to repave the roads because of all the semi trucks that drive through there?
Well, under the settlement, the ranchers have to clean up before they leave, but that doesn't mean that they have to pull out all their fences. That's going to be left under the general management plan for subsequent action. And the scenic landscape zone does include provisions that say that fencing, will come down, and I think a lot of it will. And I think that the public has an opportunity to maybe offer, its volunteer services to help it come back faster and help that fencing be removed more quickly.
So once again, like with the oyster farms, these businesses that destroy the environment have to be bought out by the government, which is taxpayer money, and then they leave behind millions of dollars of cleanup, adding to the fouling of the land even after they've stopped fouling the land. The vestiges of their fouling industries are cleaned up by the public and the public taxpayer.
Here we are.
Tell me something I don't know, Jack. Yes. Oh, sayer of profound, obvious things.
So some of the fencing will remain as a part of planning on bringing in the prescribed grazing. It'll be there ready to be used.
It's really unclear what the Park Service intentions are in regards to that. The GMP does include language that suggests that fences will be removed. The GMP also includes language about virtual fencing, which is where you put shock collars on the cattle and use GPS and to kind of create a pasture on your keyboard. And when the cow gets out of that boundary, it gets shocked in some way that causes the cow to go back in towards the center. And that's kind of experimental. Nobody really knows how effective it is, whether it will work, but it's something that the general management plan on Point Reyes anticipates at least trying out. And certainly from a public recreation standpoint, eliminating the fences is a big priority and a big advantage, because one of the things that we're likely to see as we move forward is entire networks of recreation-based trails where once you had, industrial agriculture-based cattle pastures, and getting rid of the fences that obstruct public hiking and mountain biking or what have you, you would think it would be a priority. And we expect it to be a priority as we move forward.
I was worried about, people say that the elk are going to be free to roam freely. And I said, well, not if all that fencing is up. There's still habitat fragmentation. But you kind of addressed that.
Well, and, to the extent on the remaining ranches that there are new or updated fences, they're going to have to be more wildlife permeable than the old ones. So, they're going to become more elk friendly than they were before. That doesn't mean that they don't have a negative effect on the free dispersal of elk, but it means that they are not going to be able to prevent elk from accessing any point.
Would you agree that there is no place anywhere in the seashore for barbs on wires?
Well, I would think that you wouldn't want that, although the remaining cattle operations probably are heavily dependent on barbed wire. I know that there are a lot of horse people that will not have barbs on their wires for their animals, but cattle are, well, they've had all their intelligence bred out in the interest of making them tractable. And so maybe that's something that is more difficult to get, to sell to, cattle operations, getting rid of barbed wire, given that it's so heavily ingrained into.
Well, there's
their
only
operations.
two remaining beef ranches in Point Reyes Seashore proper, separate from GGRNA, which is kind of staying very much as it was, in short. So for me, I see it as the hundreds of miles of barbed wire or wires, straight and barbed, but a lot of it is barbed, and a lot of it is rusty barbed wire, which is really just insane to put that into a wildlife corridor, a national park, as Skyward was referring to. A lot of that can go. You don't need to keep all those hundreds of miles of barbed wire fences up and around when it's just for the occasional targeted grazing, in my mind. But again, I realize you don't have an answer to that either. It's all, variable and speculative, and we the people get to speak up and say, push for what we want and don't want, I think. Yes?
I think that's true. And if you look at the general management plan, the Park Service, when it wrote that plan, it retained it for itself maximum flexibility to manage the land and the uses on the land the way that, according to its own whims. It didn't make a whole lot of promises and a whole lot of commitments that are measurable and enforceable. And I think they did that on purpose because they didn't want organizations to hold them to account for violating those promises. So I think, when you look at that general management plan, it's going to be up to the public to hold the agency's feet to the fire to get outcomes that the public wants to see.
I laugh. This is just a fun non sequitur. Sledge writes, GPS shock collars. Seems like it's a good trial run for we the people. I was thinking, I heard somebody's, there's speculation about what about the elk, and we want to study the elk, and we could do collars in them to track their movements and where they go. And I thought, I love that. Put a collar on an elk. Put a collar on an elk. Huh. Here, guy, come here. Come on, Elkie. I'm going to put a collar on you. It's like, oh, dart him, trank him, knock him unconscious, put the collar on him. Then he wakes up with a collar on him. It's like, the person who suggests that, and I know good, well-intended biologists suggest that stuff. I just want to say this. It's like, I agree to that with my big mouth. As soon as you agree to we're going to dart you first and put a collar on you and see how you like it. And it's like, Jack, that's ridiculous. It's a human being. Very different than a wild animal. Like, you're right. The person, you can tell in advance what you're going to do to them. So when they are shocked and knocked unconscious and wake up with a collar on their neck, they knew it was coming. Where a wild animal is totally traumatized by these things. And it's just, again, my bigger picture.
Well, Judd Howell.
Going on? Hang on. You got a lot of noise going on there, Skyward. Something. Anyway, my point of bringing that up is just I spending time with the elk out there and falling in love with them, how sensitive they are and how intelligent they are, and how sensitive, intelligent still bovines are, cows are, even though it's been bred out of them, as you said correctly, Eric. But again, it's for me back to the theme that Skylar and I are always banging on, which is our just disconnection with wildlife, the environment, the sensitivity and intelligence and wisdom and instincts of animals. We are just so clueless. And the answer to that is to go out and spend time with the animals. And then you watch and you learn if you're open and find your own peace of mind in the process as well.
You're sort of saying that.
And I think you don't need to have radio collars on elk to find elk on Point Reyes National.
Thank you. It's a lazy science. Everything's about tagging now. I started in the shark industry, and now everybody thinks the solution to every shark issue ever is that every fish in the ocean has a tag on it, as if that's going to change anything. And Rick mentioned that he would like to see the elk tagged, or collared, which I resisted arguing last week. But Judd Powell told me about his experience with they did that in order to find out what their home ranges were, and also for the contraception study, and damage was done to these animals. They're running, they get darted, they fall, and not to mention it's very invasive. Just go out and spend time with the animals, exactly like you said, Jack. It's not that hard to find out where they're going if you actually go and observe.
Thank you for picking up on the Skyward. I didn't know how that was. I mean, it was kind of out of left field, but I just want to put it in there. And as Deanna Lynn, whoever you are, God bless you. It's a lack of connection. Exactly. It's just a lack of connection. And that's why we are where we are, with destroying everything. Just that's the big picture. Oh, and by the way, we're an hour and 22 minutes into this wonderful conversation. And Skyward, and Eric, should we put a cap on it at 90 minutes? Just my fear is, I mean, we could go on for 2-3 hours, but then it's like this thing that people don't want to watch because it's so long. Versus
no one's going to listen to the end.
Well, if it's scintillating, of course they will. How dare you say that? Yeah.
I'll defer to Eric. How long you want to?
Yeah, 90 minutes, I think, is a good
so
target.
We've got 7 minutes-ish left. Is there anything more you'd like to add among this free-for-all here, my good friend, Eric, the half-B?
Well, I think that in terms of, what is the future of Point Reyes National Seashore now that we have this inflection point? Well, first thing that happens is that, dairy operations will no longer be part of Point Reyes National Seashore moving forward. And we have the vast majority of the area that's no longer going to be subject to commercial ranching. And so these are some big changes that might help the Park Service move in more of a direction toward public recreation, wildlife, inspiration, the kinds of things for which the seashore was originally designated. So I think it's a step in the right direction. Does it get us everything that we think that the Point Reyes National Seashore should be in the future? I would not argue that it does. Does not get the ranchers everything that they wanted either. There's also nothing in the settlement agreement in which our organization or any of the organizations that brought this lawsuit concede that ranching actually is legal in Point Reyes National Seashore. We don't have to, kind of agree, even symbolically, that it's legal for these leases to be continued. We just have to accept the reality that the Park Service is going to issue them.
Yeah.
So that's where we are.
Again, it's amazing that it's taken this long for a publication like the Press Democrat to print what the rest of us have been shouting with our small voices. It's the clear truth. And yet you've had the National Park Service themselves saying stuff like, I know that Melanie Gunn has just blatantly lied to the public, saying that they were always meant to be there and that it wasn't possible without the ranchers. And I mean, she's Point Reyes National Seashore staff. Well, if that means that all of these people that just authored that editorial to the Press Democrat were lying and that got printed. So which one, who's not telling the truth? Or is it just the convenience of being able to interpret the wording?
Well, if you get any ambiguity in any piece of congressional legislation, you're going to have arguments that probably are going to end up in court with attorneys arguing over which one's true and which one's not true. And so, I think that there is some, kind of ambiguity in some of the legislation, and there's a lack of ambiguity in other parts of the legislation. And there are people that were around in the early 1960s when the original legislation passed. I'm not one of them. I was born in 1967. So, I don't know how those conversations went down. I am aware that there was some congressional testimony by some of the advocates for the ranchers. There was a rancher ally by the name of Senator Bible from Nevada, who argued that the Point Reyes National Seashore should always have livestock grazing on it. And he was not successful in getting that into the legislation. So that was a battle that he probably fought and he probably lost. And the legislation we have and the black letter of the law is what we can interpret and what a judge can interpret. So I think, there are folks who are going to try and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat narratives that support their position. I think sometimes cynically. I think sometimes sometimes people think if we can get this narrative repeated 27 times, that we'll just accept it as common knowledge and they'll never question it. And that's how we can kind of pull the wool over everyone's eyes. That's what we see all across the West. And, wherever we're working, whether it's Bureau of Land Management lands in the interior of the Great Basin, whether it's parks or National Park Service lands in places like Capitol Reef, whether it's National Forest Service lands up in the high mountains of the West, you get these same kind of dynamics setting up where you have a very, very tiny minority of the population, even the rural local population, that makes their living by grazing livestock on public lands, that creates creates a version of history that supports their continuation, and they're desperate to continue it. And they are repeating it and repeating it and repeating it until everyone accepts it. And they're bullying the public into believing it, essentially. And I think people need to think critically for themselves, and they need to look and determine whether those narratives are true or they're false or somewhere
they're
in
false,
between.
and that's our job, is to do that. And I just want to, before this winds down, this is our special guest, Eric Mulvar, Executive Director of Western Watersheds Project. And if people want to support your work, which goes far beyond the work in California, where we know Laura Cunningham is California director, but for many Western states, where is your website and how can people find you? And there they would find a donation button. They can support your organization with money.
Our website is www.westernwatersheds.org. And you can also find us on Facebook and on Instagram. But also one thing that I didn't quite get to that I wanted to was the ranch workers. And the ranch workers didn't make any of the decisions that brought cows to Point Reyes National Seashore. As you noted, they're potentially being paid with, kind of wages that might even be less than minimum wage. They might be working in working conditions that were substandard working conditions. We were aware that there was one ranch where there wasn't a proper sewer or a proper septic system in place. And that's where they had the human sewage avalanche that went down towards
Mendoza.
the elephant seals. And we want to see those ranch workers have a just transition. So whether it's true that not all workers in America get a just transition or a big amount of funding to help them, but we didn't think that the ranch owners ought to be getting a buyout and then the workers get left hanging. We didn't think that was the right thing to do. So, I think the conservation organizations, and especially the local one, Resource Renewal Institute, has worked very hard to advocate for trying to get a soft landing for those.
It's amazing because, like, the Nature Conservancy and RRI are actually being painted as bad guys for not considering those farm workers when the opposite is true. It's just so sad.
John has one pertinent question at the end here. John Spear, we're not NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, part of the legal settlement, and if so, why?
Yes, the mediation conversation is subject to non-disclosure. That's the only part of it that's subject to non-disclosure, is those conversations that happen through the mediation. Also, the strategy discussions that the plaintiff group had amongst ourselves are under attorney-client privilege. So if we say anything about those conversations, then all of the conversations then become open to our opponents looking and seeing what our legal strategies are. We don't want that.
I totally, it's funny. This has been a big point of contention for both sides. Like, we want to get in there and find out what went on. And like, I totally understand why, if you out that stuff, negotiations can never happen in the future, because everyone knows that everything I say is going to be recorded and thrown to the public. And I mean, I play enough little bit of junior politics here, just organizing parties or whatever, or organizing a water drop to the elk. If everything I say in the back room gets thrown out there, I can't. For me, that's so obvious to me, question to ask, but that's the reason. And that explanation is, well, you already said it. It's great. I mean, of course.
And it's also a pain in the neck for the plaintiffs, because, we might like to be able to talk about some of the reasons that we made the decisions we made, but we have to bite our tongues. And, that's just part of that process. And mediation confidentiality is very commonly applied, and it was part of the settlement agreement as well.
I can't believe we didn't. Did you answer this? What is a plan to track the newly freed elk? Was that discussed at all?
No, we didn't get to that. It's another show.
No, did you discuss that, Eric, and the plans for the future?
I didn't discuss that, but I don't think that the general management plan is specific beyond saying that the elk are not going to be confined. They're going to be allowed to grow up into their natural carrying capacity on the land. They're going to,
Cool.
have fencing that is, more permeable. Some of the fencing will be removed. They're not going to be hazed. Those are the things that we know for sure. We are going to have to watch how those elk kind of respond. And I think we're going to see elk dispersing throughout the national seashore and growing in population, and it's going to be
I
good
agree.
news
And
for
two
everybody.
things. One is I'm thrilled that there's not a management plan for the elk through the Park Service. I'm sure I wouldn't like what would happen, because it would be the usual kind of brutal treatment of animals and not being sensitive to them, which unfortunately is a bureaucracy most times. And John Spear had one follow-up question. I respect him, so I want to read it. Okay, that's understood. But are the terms of the payment to all parties considered public info? And my understanding is absolutely not, which is why we don't know the numbers. But Eric, you're the expert.
They're not even known to me as someone who participated in the mediation. I don't know how much these ranchers received as the buyout for their leases from the Nature Conservancy. Only the Nature Conservancy and the individual
So as I
ranchers
asked
know
you
that.
separately, when I was saying, hey, Eric, 2 weeks ago, I said, is it 30 or 40 million? I'm hearing both numbers. And you said, yeah, that sounds like what I'm hearing too. You didn't have an answer.
I'm reading the same figures in the newspaper as everyone else. And it's as much of a mystery to me as it is to everyone.
Wild. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your showing up and traveling all this way to your computer screen.
Well, thanks for having me on your podcast.
Skylar from the field there. Thank you, man. Take it away.
Yeah, Eric, it was a pleasure. I hope I get to talk to you more. I think Sledge's question is a good way to summarize the show, because it's what I've been dealing with ever since Shame of Point Reyes came out, and the audience reaction from a lot of people being, well, how can we help the farmers? You've been helping the farmers. You've been subsidizing their businesses. You've been allowing them to live there practically rent-free while they consume natural resources, while they damage the land, while they run for-profit businesses on public land. After they took what, I guess after inflation, now the equivalent is $600 million the first time around, another $40 million this time around, and they're still not gone. So no, we can't thank them for leaving, because they're going to be there at least 15 more months, plus the people that still aren't leaving. So sure, I guess we could say thank you for that golden handshake. But again, I really have to insist that people stop thinking that the ranchers are victims.
I agree. And I also will take a more diplomatic tone to perhaps Eric's delight or surprise, which is for those, I mean, my God, 12 or 14 ranchers are moving out of the park. I want to say I'm willing to enter into those political waters and say, great, thank you so much. Great. And I don't need to hug them and say they're heroes, but I don't need to spit on them as they're walking out the door, because I want them to. I want to escort them out the door. Thank you so much. And then once that happens in 15 months, if it happens, Skylar, and that if is for you, then we can have another conversation.
Eric, thank you again. And thank you everyone who tuned in. And a plug. If you didn't watch me and George Werthner last Thursday talking about the difference between fire conditions and fire fuel, focusing on LA as an example, we are doing a follow-up Thursday, and we're going to be talking about cheatgrass again, and the absurdity of how people won't allow native plants to exist while they decorate plants around their homes, and 10-lane freeways in LA are still not working fire breaks. So we'll talk about the cheatgrass issue again, if you want to tune in, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Skylar. See you